having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. You can help our series by pressing subscribe and share it with family and friends. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Dickey Collas. Mark is an experienced marine scientist operating independently as Dickey Collas Marine, based in London. Mark has over 35 years' experience across fisheries and biodiversity, with a decade in Northern Ireland, in the Netherlands, and in ICES HQ in Denmark. As chair of the ICES Advisory Committee, Mark oversaw the production and delivery of over 250 pieces of annual advice to governments emphasising ecosystem-based fisheries management with proactive stakeholder engagement. Hi, Mark. Welcome back to Seafood Matters.
Hello, Jim. It's good to be back and have another chance to talk to you all.
Great, thank you. Can I start by asking about yourself? Because reading your bio there, you've certainly had an interesting career and spent a lot of it right at the top of your game.
I've been active for about 35 years now, and I think you can say that my career's been in three parts so far. I did 10 or so years in Northern Ireland, working in Belfast with the Department of Agriculture there that became AFBI later on. I then moved and did roughly 10 years in the Netherlands, where I became the National Scientific Advisor on Pelagic Fisheries, and I ran the Pelagic Fisheries Group. And then I moved for about 11 years to ICES in Copenhagen, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. And there it was in two parts. I worked as the Ecosystem Approach Coordinator, and then I became the chair of the Advisory Committee, which, as you said, advises governments and intergovernmental organizations in the North Atlantic. And it's at that last stage, particularly at ICES, where I moved from the traditional fisheries scientist role to a much more ecosystem approach and science for policy kind of role.
You would be more on an advisory basis as well.
Absolutely. Particularly at the end there at ICES, I spent most of my time collating information and working with a marvelous team at ICES HQ, and also members from across all the ICES countries in the advisory committee to advise governments and work out and build a system that really can provide better advice to the countries and also international organizations.
But from where you come through your career, you obviously, when you finished up on an advisory basis, you had a huge amount of knowledge behind you.
Yes, but you have to be very careful because you begin to lose touch with things on the ground. So one of the jobs that And one of the things I'm trying to do now that I'm back in London and working for myself is re-engage with individuals and peoples and communities and companies that are using the sea. And I think that's very important. So just having the science and the overall knowledge base is great, but if you don't know what people are concerned about, then you really lose touch.
Well, I find that fascinating, having spent over 50 years working for myself. I can see in that and appreciate the fact that, okay, you reached a high level, but you never lost touch with the, as you called it, the ground roots and the ground level. So that says a lot about you.
Well, I think, Jim, people could accuse me of losing touch. That's why I'm trying to make sure I get it back again. So.
Well, credit to you for going. If we move on onto the ocean film, with David Attenborough, what was your reaction when you saw the Attenborough piece calling for a full-on ban on bottom trawling?
Well, I try to not have a gut reaction. I try to consider, and I actually took paper and pen into the cinema with me. So I took loads of notes, which is interesting doing it in the dark. But as I watched the film, I had a real concern that it's quite a lazy film in terms of how it uses emotion and imagery and music to set the good against the bad. It's a bit like a Marvel film to some extent. You have these menacing machines against the people, or War of the Worlds even, machines coming to destroy everything. I used cliched techniques and was very predictable. I knew when they would change the music and the coloring, so you knew that things would start to suddenly go to big ships and chains and things like that. And there's loads of good in it. We've got connectivity between the MPAs highlighted. Ocean is not a featureless desert, it says. There's highlighting issues of subsidies and plastics. And still, it highlighted the issue of bycatch, which is an ongoing concern, and the decline in some marine groups and habitats. So there was lots of good in there. But what worried me is it really focused on issues that I feel are minor compared to the ongoing biodiversity crisis. Why no mention of things like eel? What on earth is happening to eel in Europe? It's disappearing. Salmon, we're struggling. Cod in the south. Crucially, seabirds. Seabirds across the northeast Atlantic are declining everywhere, and yet it wasn't addressed. Oyster beds, seagrasses, estuaries. That's a very UK focus response from me, but I really felt the film didn't touch on it. And I'm going to be very forthright. There were a number of things I found deeply unsettling. Particularly, I'm going to use another example, not even the bottom trawl, because we'll probably come to that later, but the krill issue. David Attenborough, who is just the narrator, said that some people claim that the krill fishery is sustainable. And then he went on to decry the krill fishery. But in fact, that krill fishery takes 2% of what the scientists say is sustainable as a fishery. And it's a decision from 27 member states of CAMLA. So it's a highly sustainable fishery in terms of its ecosystem impact at the moment. We need to monitor it and make sure it stays that way. But this kind of offhand besmirching of what other people in science is saying was really quite annoying to me and not worthy of someone with the prestige of David Attenborough, really.
It seems to be a general consensus of opinion with a lot of people that it's almost like what you said, it's what they don't say more than what they do.
Well, I think we'll get onto this later, Jim, but this whole notion of the only tool that we have available to save and manage and use the oceans is protection and closure. Those are very important, very, very important elements in our toolbox, but they're not the only ones. And I think we'll touch on this a little later as we talk.
Yeah. Do high-profile documentaries have a duty to show balanced science? Or is good photography and clever storytelling enough to shape public opinion?
Well, you're right. Good photography and clever storytelling is enough to shape public opinion. We see that, and it happens all the time. But I think people need to realize that Ocean with David Attenborough is a lobbying film. It's funded by people who want to make changes, and it's not a documentary. It's not a well, some of the science facts are a little iffy, but it's certainly not a classic kind of BBC Natural History Unit film. And filmmakers don't have a duty to tell balanced science or show balanced science if they're telling a story. And so people need to remember that. It's art, it's lobbying, it can be commercial. But I think with Ocean, people were very lucky that David Attenborough, well, the filmmakers were very lucky that David Attenborough, such an authoritative voice when it comes to nature, said that he would take on this role. And he is associated with facts and science and broadcasting, so people think it's a documentary and think it's the truth.
He's certainly not a national treasure in fishing eyes now.
Well, you've said it, Jim. I mean, I think it's a sad situation that the end of his career. And I'm going to be criticised for this because it's a bit like criticising for the Queen Elizabeth or, in my world, Dolly Parton. I mean, these are people above criticism. And unfortunately, I think David Attenborough has made this jump.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
And others, I mean, we have Hugh Fearnley-Whitty's of course, with the landing obligation discard ban, and now we have Stephen Fry joining in. All of these people are putting their voices to basically what is a campaign.
Yeah, I don't think that's good at all. But on my comment there about Attenborough as far from in fisheries eyes, that's not me pushing that forward. That's what he's done for himself, and I can understand where fishermen are coming from, because they're seeing it almost threatening their livelihoods.
Absolutely.
Are you for or against a ban on trawling in all MPAs in the UK? And what would be your reasoning?
Well, Jim, I'm going to say that's not for me to decide, and I'll explain why. Bottom trawling is a destructive fishing method. It does destroy. That's widely documented, but it is a method that produces a vast amount of food for everybody, and has been carried out in areas, particularly around the United Kingdom, where it's been for 100 years or 150 years in some cases. There's been regular trawling. Now, in the same way that people look at the land, and I know the analogy is often mocked when we start talking about ploughing the land compared to fishing, but Britain should be a country covered in forests. It's not. We are lucky that Britain is surrounded by vibrant, amazing seas, kelp forests, sand, banks, shorelines, salt marshes, and all of these things, which are basically all still there. But when it comes to, are you for or against a ban on bottom trawling, I'm actually for the use and the implementation of the existing guidance on MPAs. And it's crucial that we remember that an MPA is a geographically defined area which is designated or regulated and managed to achieve specific conservation objectives. That's the CBD, Conventional Biological Diversity decision from 2004. So managed to achieve specific conservation objectives. So it does this distinction, this definition doesn't prescribe how strict the protection needs to be. That comes in later decisions and IUCN advice and things like that. But what is clear is an MPA requires regulation or management that supports a conservation goal. And so each MPA can have a different purpose, and each community that helps set up an MPA can choose the methods that are in there. They can have all types of elements in that as long as it is managed for conservation objectives. And so I'm not going to say I'm for or against bottom trawling in MPAs. What I am going to say is I'm a great believer that local communities and people who set up the MPAs should be the people who work with managers and scientists to bring about those decisions.
I think, if I'm right, Mark, it was in a previous podcast with yourself, and I'm sure you made the point that if they are closing an area like an MPA, they can't just close it, they've got to monitor it.
Well, one of the frustrations we have is that we have some amazing databases held by JNCC and Natural England and others, and in fact the European Environment Agency until Britain, the UK, pulled out of the European Environment Agency. But we have some amazing databases on MPAs. We map them and they have the objectives. But if you try and look into what MPAs have achieved those conservation objectives, it's almost impossible to find out. The MPAs exist and they will exist officially forever, but we do not know whether they have, or systematically know whether they have achieved their objectives. There's a huge weakness in the system. So we now have all these areas with management measures, but we don't know what they're doing. And people are asking for more measures. And we have the new suggestion from NMO to close some of them. I think it's 42 or so to bottom trawling. But actually, we don't know how far we've got in terms of the conservation objectives for those MPAs. That's what I don't understand. And I'm an evidence-driven scientist, and I want to see the evidence. I want to know where have we got with those MPAs and what added conservation value to the objectives of those existing MPAs will come about as a result of the next measures.
That's really interesting. That's so true as well. An alternative to bans, MPAs, seasonal closure, gear innovations, does any of that work?
Of course, they'll work. I think what's crucial, and we know this from the long history of fisheries science, is that we have a raft of tools, but the only tools that work are the tools that are enforced and accepted and agreed on by everybody. I mean, I'm not naive. I'm not saying that these people are good, these people are bad. I'm not saying in any way that people adhere to the rules. I remember during the mackerel cases of the late 1990s, when I was in a room with mackerel fishermen, who were very genial, polite and lovely and wonderful, and found that they were doing massive mackerel overfishing with all those special ways of taking the fish off the boats. And it was really a clear indication that you've got to be very careful to have rules that work and are understood, and people see the benefit of them. So that's where I push really hard with trying to bring about. My overall objective is to make sure that biodiversity is conserved and services are maintained. And for that, you need agreement from everybody. So imposing without any say, without equity, without justice, I think is very difficult. Luckily, the new proposal within English waters has that consultation before September. So I'm looking forward to see what people do and react to that. And I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what they're doing in Scotland. Did Scotland announce any bans?
No, not yet. England have. What would you say the meaning of biodiversity?
Meaning? The meaning of biodiversity. Biodiversity is I think of it in three ways. It's the species, it's the ecosystem elements, the habitats, and it's the entire functioning of the ecosystem as a whole. So, for instance, biodiversity is about maintaining for future generations that resilience that having all those species means. It's about protecting and conserving and ensuring that we have not disrupted the species, hopefully not made them extinct, certainly, but even less than that. We don't disrupt the major functionings of the species. We manage to conserve the habitats, and we manage to maintain ecosystem functioning overall. That, of course, is a struggle when we have major anthropogenic pressures, human pressures, and when we have climate change. So that's how I see biodiversity. It's a kind of an interesting question, Jim. I'm going to ask you why you asked, what do I think of biodiversity?
It's just that we hear so much of it, and I just thought it would be an interesting question for some of our listeners that's nothing other.
Okay, I'll keep it simple. It's species, it's habitats, and it's ecosystem structure and function.
Thank you.
Making sure that's resilience for the future.
Yeah, that's excellent. And going back to the point you made about bird numbers, did you say the North Atlantic? And
across the board, whether it be close to fishing areas or away from fishing areas, we have a major biodiversity crisis in seabirds. From Iceland to Norway, all over the place.
I don't know if it's an oversimplification, but in a previous podcast with a fisheries scientist, he was going into detail explaining how he feels that one of the problems, it's almost there's a name to describe it, but it's one of the measures is causing another problem, because with the increase in mesh size and there's more small fish escaping, there is more fish in the sea for the available food. And he says that a fish is far more efficient.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
At catching and eating fish than a bird. So he actually has a theory that the birds are going down because there's too much competition for the food. They can't get like sand eels and things like that, which is their diet mainly. They're competing because they reckon there's just so much fish in the sea now. The different measures like mesh size and things like that.
I'd phrase it differently than that, Jim, because I'm not going to head down one hypothesis or another because I think it's very complicated. But what I do think is I think people have looked for simple answers as to the decline in seabirds, the loss of productivity. A good example is it's very easy to say it's all fishing, but we have declines across the Northeast Atlantic, whether it's in colonies close to fishing or away from fishing. And I think that looking for a simple answer is hiding from is enabling us not to go and find the real mechanism for why this decline is happening. I think there needs to be a large amount of investigation and research in which doesn't just look for easy panaceas as to why seabirds are declining, because it's a bit like insects disappearing here in the UK. It's a decline which is really really dreadful and needs to be addressed.
I'm not sure if I would be comfortable if I was in a group that you were overseeing, because I think you would be coming with a dreaded why.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I like the question why, but what I don't mean that more science is the best solution. But what I do mean is people's attention needs to be broadened as to the potential mechanism.
Well, I just feel that from the way you talk, and just not talking about yourself, but just in your conversation, I think you don't accept what you see as like face value. You dig into things to understand, get to the bottom of it.
Oh, Jim, no, you're absolutely right. I think every paradigm, every idea, every narrative needs to be challenged. You should. I was once working with a guy who moved to a new university, and he got told off for questioning the norms of why things were always done that way. And this person felt quite bad, and he came to see me, and I said, "No, that's your job. Your job is to go in and ask why. And your job is to challenge the norms." And I think there are a number of established concepts that need to be challenged. So yes, that is one of my underlying traits. Well spotted,
Yeah,
Jim.
which is good to know that it's there. Is the public been misled by emotionally charged narratives?
Let's have a think. I want to see fundamental systems-wise changes to the system as a whole, the economics, the governance of society, because I'm really concerned about the state of the ecosystems that we use and need. And I don't think fiddling with little bits here and there or black and white mechanisms black and white measures is really going to change things. So is the public being misled? The public is being misled if they think that one simple measure can resolve the real challenges within the system. And here we have the classic example. Throughout, I've just come back from UNOC, the UN Ocean Conference, and even on the subways, the metro, the tram lines, they had big adverts on the screen saying, and I'm going to look up the picture to give you exactly what they said, actually. They said, "When they trawl, we lose it all." And I don't know who they mean by they, So when they trawl, and we're getting back to this David Attenborough, not focusing on the people who were trawling, he was focusing on these big machines, not the communities. And so it is a really misleading, I'll give you that, it is misleading to say that one measure will solve this problem, if there is a problem. And as I said to you, I want to see the data and the information coming from the MPAs as to know whether the conservation objectives are being achieved and what extra measures are needed.
That gets quite worrying and asks you where that's coming from. Who's driving that?
Well, this is where you get into the whole dynamic of money and the funding of organizations, and why some organizations can align themselves very easily with these black and white kind of issues. I was recently hearing that WWF are about to produce a report on bottom trawling. And WWF are a very interesting organization in that they're called the World Wildlife Fund, and yet they're made up of lots of local organizations, and each of those organizations have a different view. And so for them to find a consensus, a narrative, is very tough, very hard. And they understand the nuance of individual communities and individual situations in different countries and different parts of the world. And it's there where I think there's credible work coming out. But when you have organizations that think that one measure can make a difference, a dramatic difference, and save the world, it can occasionally. Banning aerosols in the 1980s, great, we saved the ozone. But it's very difficult. And I'm not going to go into sort of hypotheticals as to why and how and who's funding. It's certainly an interesting area that others are looking into.
Yeah, that gets a wee bit concerning. Is there a risk of celebrity-driven environmentalism?
Of course, but they're entitled to, and they have funding, and they have the access. But you have to remember, I'm not going to go into a restaurant and say I'm the best cook in the world. So they, I hope, would be able to say to us, there is some merit in the 100 years of studying the marine system and fisheries science. We have managed to turn around a number of stocks. I just heard that southern bluefin tuna has now just been accredited by the Marine Stewardship Council. That's amazing. 15 years ago, southern bluefin tuna was a basket case. Sorry, I did use that. It was in a terrible situation. And it's been turned around with management and science and measures. So this notion that we have nothing to offer as scientists is quite interesting. Also, there tends to be a trend. I used an AI package recently to look at the claims of some of the scientists and some of the environmental NGOs, to look at how they develop stories and concepts. And it turned out that the AI package itself, if an organization said it was science-led enough, it believed that they were science-led. And that can be quite challenging, because for me, science is about looking and criticizing and testing and understanding the methodology and realizing that everything is about facts as estimates rather than facts as ultimate truths. And I think a lot of what's going on, particularly with the celebrities, is this notion that there is one truth and it's their truth. And if you just look at the International Panel on Biodiversity, IPES, they have a really wonderful report on values and understanding and working with communities. And all this really fantastic work is just thrown away by these black and white approaches to marine sustainability and marine conservation.
You're not indicating that some scientists would take as gospel what they got from AI?
Some would. Some would. I wouldn't. I was playing a game with AI. I think it's crucial. I mean, with AI, you've got to be really careful. I did another little test. I asked it to write a piece on some fisheries for me, and then I checked all the references, and it had made up half of them.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Riley Herbst from 2311 Racing here, and you know what grinds my gears? Waiting for coffee. But instead of counting frappes and lattes, I fire up Chumba Casino. No apps, no fuss, just fun social casino games to pass the time. By the time my coffee's ready,
order for Riley.
I've already taken a few victory laps. Next time you're stuck waiting, make it entertaining. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
So, yeah, not at the moment. AI is not up to standard in any way.
There's a couple live in our village not far away from us, and the woman, she works for AI. She works with AI. And her exact words to me were, she says, anything you get from AI, make sure you fact check it. Invariably wrong, especially with statistics.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Currently, yeah.
What do you understand about the term just transition? And what relevance do you think it has to the context of a trawl ban and MPAs?
I don't know what the phrase just transition means actually in that context. It's not something I use. I work in the world with the Global Biodiversity Framework, but from the Convention of Biological Diversity, which has this target 3 of 30 by 30. I work in the world of BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, the FAO Blue Transformation, which is about transforming fisheries and making it resilient for the future, the EU Restoration Law, and the IPES Transformative Change Assessment. And all of those are about empowering communities and users to find solutions with the objectives and the challenges and understanding the limitations of the system. And you also need to be brave, and you need champions. That's one crucial thing I think you need. You need to be champions. I recently have got a little concerned, particularly, and I have a feeling this may happen to me, that anybody that stands up to challenge some of the growing paradigms gets labeled in the hands of someone else. I've spent my career spending most of my time working at the boundary between fisheries and science, and increasingly with other stakeholders. And I have a feeling by standing up, and certainly I did a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago after I saw the Ocean movie, and I'm waiting for someone to turn around and say that I'm not working to the benefit of biodiversity or conservation. I'm in the hands of or the pocket of someone else. We'll wait and see if that happens. But I'm a great believer that we have to transform the system overall.
I think that's disgraceful for you to even feel or think that's coming, Mark, because somebody that's done so much as you, I would like to think anyway that people would see where you're coming from, and as we said earlier, why and what's behind you, rather than, I think that's so disrespectful to even think that you're in the hands of somebody else or in somebody else's pocket with the amount of experience you have behind you?
Well, people look for some sort of mechanisms, don't they? I mean, a classic, and I know you know Mike Kaiser very well. When Mike was labelled as the enemy on a presentation, that's not very productive at all. Someone asked me recently, is Mike Kaiser in the hands of, or is he paid by the fishing industry? And of course, Mike is not. Mike is a very robust fisheries scientist. I'm very lucky. I to my credit, I was attacked by Bloom in France when I presented the ICES advice on pulse trawl, where we said that the pulse trawl was in fact ecologically more sustainable than the beam trawl, and we presented that to the European Parliament. And I was attacked by Bloom as being part of a Dutch cabal, because I am Dutch as well as British. And at the same time, I was congratulated just last year for expressing my deep concern about the lack of management of mackerel and Norwegian spring spawning herring in the Neaf area and the coastal states. So I bounce between both worlds, and I say what I'm beginning, since I've left ICES, certainly more and more to say what I think. But yes, someone will turn around and say that I'm in the hands or the pocket of someone at some point, I'm sure.
I don't know if Bloom are in a position to criticise anybody, because it's felt in this country that Bloom couldn't get, in fact, it's in the words in a podcast with Mike Park, who's head of one of our associations. And in his words, they couldn't get at what they wanted with the fishing industry, so they attacked the market. That's his words.
Okay. I don't know. I didn't hear Mike on that podcast, so I'll have to go and have a look.
Yeah, that was his words. He felt that with the deep water species, which was important for some of our bigger boats, he says Bloom have attacked the market and advising people not to eat fish that's caught below a certain depth. What would a ban on trawling mean for coastal communities and livelihoods?
I don't know, Jim, because I'm not an economic, social, or anthropology scientist. So that's what I said to you at the beginning of this podcast about the need for me to keep my feet on the ground. Of course, we have the government figures, wasn't it? The closure that's being suggested is, I wrote down the figures somewhere. The closure is, I think it was 500 million a year, which over 20 years added up to quite a bit. But then they then claimed that the benefit was in the billions. I think it was 3 billion or something like that. So the MMO have, I assume with Natural England or someone, done some estimates. Oh yeah, here we go. Consultation period over 12 weeks, close on 1st of September, and over 20 years will cost communities £7.8 million, and the benefits of 3.1 billion. That's interesting analysis. Very interesting to look into that. Of course, it has very little to do with the cultural values, I imagine, or the feeling of people in the sea. What I would say to you, going back to the ocean film, which worried me in particular, was this disjoint between the perception that the people who work on the sea are against the sea. You and I both know, and many of your listeners know, that people are part of the ecosystem, they're part of the marine system in a way that they've, and this has gone on for so long, for millennia. So this whole detachment, a very Western idea of us being apart and apart from the sea, is quite saddening, really, quite a worry. And I think the ocean film does it tries to build links with us and the sea again, but it really does not do. There's a people who work on the sea justice, I think.
Does any common ground exist between the fishing industry and NGO campaigns to ban trawling? And if so, how might this be built on to progress a way forward?
Oh, absolutely. There's huge common ground. We see this. Everybody wants to see a healthy ecosystem. Everybody wants to see communities that thrive. The biodiversity agenda, the new global biodiversity agenda, recognizes that people are an inherent part of the ecosystem. They need to derive services. Across the world, we have vast areas where, mostly in the developing world, where people are so intrinsically linked to the sea, they have to have a healthy ocean. In our world, in the West here, we share we're very aligned in many ways. It's just the demonization of each other that we have to be careful of. I'm currently reviewing some of the advisory councils of the EU, and there we see tensions between NGOs and fishers in a way that in some of those advisory councils, but in others, they're working very, very closely together. And so that shows that there is alignment. It's all about realizing that the conservation objectives are shared by all. And it's just how you go about delivering those, I think. For me, it's all about finding solutions together through partnership and then taking action. Because what we can't do is not take action. There is a biodiversity crisis. As I said to you, there's a number of organisms, habitats, and ecosystem structures that are changing. I'll give you an example of the Western Mediterranean. Huge numbers of invasive species taking over now, and they are really causing problems for the fishers.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And the fishers need help and they need campaigning, and the NGOs can offer all that. Another example is just last week at UNOC, at the UN Oceans Council, I saw an example of what they're calling fisheries refuges. And that's where fisheries and NGOs come together with the government to decide local MPA measures to deliver conservation objectives. And those are now spreading all across Mexico. And the knowledge base that they're bringing is based on that of the fishers and the scientists working with the NGOs. So it can be done.
That's interesting. Who gets to decide? Policy is increasingly shaped by public pressure. How do we ensure that science stays at the heart of the conversation?
I'd take it a bit broader, Jim, and I would say that the crucial thing is that knowledge stays at the heart of the conversation. And knowledge is about science, it's about data, it's about monitoring, it's about values as well, though. And it's also about bringing all of that together. You need local solutions, and you need solutions that resonate with the people that are impacted. We have an approach in Europe where we like to think that expensive and intense ways of doing things are the best way. We see across the developing world with ecosystem-based management that you don't necessarily need to have really big, expensive science. We have so much in the UK and in Europe now in terms of science that we really need to learn how to share that with everybody else. Your question, though, I think goes a bit deeper. How do we ensure that science stays at the heart of the conversation? I'm not quite sure that we need to do that in a way that science could be used by everybody to push their own agenda. And I think that's what we need to be more aware of rather than assuming that science is always objective. We need to make sure that science is there and informing the debate, but isn't completely deciding the debate. You come from the fisheries community, Jim, and they, of course, have spent a long time, particularly through the 90s and early noughties, saying the science is wrong. And often the science had problems. And it's that challenge of the science which may just result in better science in the end. So ensure science stays at the heart of the conversation. Yes, but also make sure that we challenge science all the time too.
I have to say, as you say, describe me from coming from the fishing community. I honestly, from talking with fishermen, they're all for science. They're not against science.
Yeah, sorry, if I came over saying that they're against science, I don't think that's the case. I think, but we need to challenge the science regularly. Let's take the case of North Sea cod. Ice, which I know quite well because I was in charge of the ICES advice over the last 5 years. And we knew as scientists that the catches of cod in around Shetland were good. We also knew that in the southern North Sea, cod had almost disappeared. But we had a stock assessment that had one population, one stock, and we had a management regime which also required only one measure. And as scientists, we were producing advice based on that framework, saying that the catches needed to go down because following all the reference points, the stock was in trouble. And yet, the day-to-day experience of those Shetland fishermen was we are catching cod and there's plenty of them. So in that way, the science was right, but the science was also wrong. And that is where the challenge lies when you have experiences and overall aggregated kind of frameworks and mechanisms.
Yeah, I can remember that situation. And do you feel that by putting measures in place that's affecting Shetland, do you feel that would have helped the situation in the southern North Sea?
Ooh. Well, put it the other way around. If we had found local solutions in the southern North Sea and the northern North Sea, there's two things. One, it would be more expensive to do that. But two, you're likely to have people who were more accepting of the measures. So I would say local solutions are best in those cases within the context of everything altogether. But I struggle to think, it's almost impossible with the limited resources that we all have to resolve all those tensions.
That's really interesting. Really interesting, because taking it to local level, I think it would be acceptable by all sides.
Well, and then we come back to the MPA debate, and we come back to conserving the conservation objectives. MPAs in theory, and we have them with the MMO offshore, and then inshore we've got the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authorities, the IFCAs. So those are designed for local solutions. And that's what worries me about these black and white sort of bans or restrictions. Luckily, we have a consultation which will go until September now in England. And we will see. But it is those, when you have local local dynamics, it's crucial to address those. Let's take another example, the fisheries management plans, which certainly are happening across the UK. They're being done differently in Northern Ireland, Wales, England, and Scotland. But I've looked at the Scottish ones and the English ones, and I've spoken to various people in the system. And I think they're very weak in terms of biodiversity and conservation. Now, it's expensive. It would require resourcing, but why are we not linking those fisheries management plans to this whole debate on MPAs and bringing it all together under ecosystem-based management? We know that DEFRA now in England are collecting information on the social and economic status of those impacted and those in the marine realm or arena. So why aren't we having the fisheries management plans linked to the whole concepts of biodiversity and conservation as well? They claim, of course, that they are, but if you look very closely, they're not. They're all about just managing catch. And that, I think, is one of the challenges we're now facing. If we claim to want to do things ecosystem-based, why are we still doing catches and yields on one side and biodiversity and conservation objectives on another?
Would you not feel we're all conservationists?
We are all conservationists, but the policies at the moment in DEFRA and also Marine Scotland are done in different departments. So you have policies being developed on yield and catch in one department, and you have the whole issue of MPAs and the measures there being dealt with in a different department and linking through to Natural England and to the MMO. So there is no integration at the moment in government. There is little integration in terms of the science and little integration in terms of the lobby groups. So we are all conservationists, but we're stuck in this siloed system, which I can't see changing, unfortunately. But really, if we want to talk about looking forward to resiliencies, we need to address that.
You're so correct there. Who you feel drives the narrative? Is it scientists, NGOs, the media, or public figures like Attenborough?
Well, what's clear at the moment is the narrative is being driven by certain environmental lobby groups. That's very clear. They have incredibly good, strong, well-resourced teams working on this. We saw it last week at Nice, at UNOC, where I already said the trams had all the adverts up for the terrible impact of bottom trawling. We see it across the board in terms of their ability to get high-profile individuals come and give their case. So when I was in the Netherlands, the pelagic industry, who are seen as the very bad people, because they, of course, have the very large trawlers, and they go around the world, they're basically ships with processing units on board. And I remember back in 2004, 2005, the Dutch government said to them, we will stop lobbying on your behalf because you're big enough to look after yourself.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com.
Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot. Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me. Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com. Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And lo and behold, within a few years, they were portrayed as bad people. And since then, they haven't recovered. So those large, what you could call super trawlers, are now synonymous with everything that's bad with industrial fishing because they lost some of their champions. And they were big, but they weren't big enough to cope with global organizations.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from there. There's a few of them been fishing in the west coast of Scotland, and I've heard various conversations where they've been banned in many countries around the world, from Australia to Europe and Scandinavia, and yet they're fishing in Scotland and quite happily. And the feeling is that, going back to what you said there about funds, money, do Marine Scotland have the appetite to do anything about it? It doesn't seem.
Well, I think you'll find we're in different situations there, Jim, because you may have slightly misunderstood me. I mean that the big pelagic trawlers don't have the funds to campaign anymore. I mean, you mentioned the Australian example. They were down there, they were fishing with official government quota. It was judged highly sustainable, and Australia has incredibly tight fisheries regimes. And they were having their bycatch monitored, and still they lost the public argument. They were thrown out of Australia. It's a very interesting challenge as to who has the voice, who has the power here. Yeah.
You were at you called it UNOC, that United Nations organization on the oceans.
It was the United Nations Oceans Conference. It was
Yeah.
their third one. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you describe the mood and tone of the conference?
Let's have a think. It was energetic. It was chaotic. And it also got quite a lot done. There were lots of people talking about the oceans. There was some hypocrisy, and I'm going to point a little bit to, shall I say it? Yes. Macron announced apparently a large MPA or enforcement of an MPA in the South Pacific, in French South Pacific. Whether it's a new one or he just re-announced, and that same one is being debated, but at the same time campaigned against the UK preventing bottom trawling of French vessels in its own MPAs. So it was all over the place in some ways, but there was a huge amount of energy, and there was a lot done.
So what stood out to you in the session you attended?
What stood out to me is how a lot of the global fisheries are coming together in terms of understanding that if you don't manage fisheries, they don't work. And yet that understanding was not being recognized by another constituency who thought that the only tool that you have available is protection and preventing activities. So it was very clear that on one side you had protect everything, or rather protect 30%, compared to the manage 100% constituency. And it was clear that the manage 100% constituency had the evidence to show that it can be done, whether it be tuna fisheries in the South Pacific or around the Southern Hemisphere, whether it be local community fisheries off Africa or in Asia. There are tools and mechanisms that can really help sustain and make fisheries more resilient and protect biodiversity. And I think that message just didn't cross over to the community that were also at UNOC, that thought that any form of exploitation was bad, and struggling to get the message 30 by 30, which is only one of the 23 targets of the CBD. And also, it kind of, I struggled with the notion, particularly coming from the UK now, where we have 40% of the seas are under MPAs. And so what do we do with the other 60%? And the other 60% need to be managed. And that, I think, didn't come out. Well, that distinction was very clear from UNOC as a whole. And the other one was the huge amount of science and data that we have available to all of us, which I thought was rather wonderful.
And I know the fear with many people in the industry is that by going back to a ban, maybe in trawling MPAs, it's going to push it and put pressure on the other 60%.
Jim, I would take it further. I discussed this with a number of people last week. If you tell people who set up the rules, the measures, and the objectives for an MPA that in 20 years, some outsiders will suddenly dictate what those measures will be, completely irrelevant to what you decided, do you think they will engage in an MPA process? Just by using the label MPA means that it now looks like others have the opportunity to come in and change the rules of the game. So I think a large number of industries are just not going to engage in any future MPA processes because the rules have been shown to not be valid. You can suddenly have a political campaign which will result in a change, and suddenly what you thought were your local measures, your local objectives, can be thrown out the window.
Did it feel like people were actually rolling up their sleeves and dealing with real world complexities?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think so. A good example is FAO used the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN launched a brand new method for how to assess the status of fish stocks around the world. And they showed that this new method now can be applied to 2,500 stocks around the world. And so that really, and by that I mean all the data limited, data poor situations that are out there. So I do think people were rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. Much of the data and information, and there were some really good talks from businesses as well into how they're investing in resilient and sustainable seas. All of that came through quite a lot. So there was quite a lot of hands-on stuff, yeah. And there was also a lot of importance placed on indigenous and traditional and local knowledge. That came through very clearly. So there was quite a dynamic and quite a range of subjects discussed at the whole conference.
Was there space for uncomfortable truths?
I hope so. I think so. I spoke at 3 different events, and I certainly said some uncomfortable truths and challenged people. One of the challenges I gave when I was meeting with the regional seas convention, so it's people like OSPAR and HELCOM and UNET-MAP, was the challenges around bycatch, and that if you don't talk to the fishers, you will never get enough information and data, and you'll never be able to resolve the challenges around bycatch. So yeah, I certainly used the opportunity to raise those issues, yes.
Yeah. What's the current international guidelines for establishing and managing MPAs, marine protected areas?
Well, that's a subject and a half. As I was heading to UNOC, I did quite a bit of research to get this sorted out in my head. I already mentioned the original conventional biological diversity decisions on protected areas and then molding those into marine protected areas. We've got, of course, the Global Biodiversity Framework overall, which sets the standard. And it's not just the number 30 by 30, but they've got to be manage, they've got to be equitable. There's a whole list of things that are in there. But then you go to other guidance. You've got the IUCN guidance. You've got 6 categories in there. And those 6 categories for MPAs in the IUCN guidance actually state quite clearly in all of them, you can't have industrial fishing in an MPA. What they don't have is you can't have certain gear types in an MPA.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And so that's the shift, the challenge that has occurred without sort of the scientific rigor. But having said all that, these are only guides, and each country in itself creates its own system and approach. And Europe has done different things, and different countries. And in the English setup and the British setup, we know that JNCC have set up some very clear guidelines on how to develop MPAs. And they've also defined an MPA in the UK context. And then those go into an implementation cycle with DEFRA, with Marine Scotland, with Northern Ireland and Wales. And the responsibilities are given to Natural England, to DERA in Northern Ireland, to Nature Scotland, and to Nature Resources Wales. So it's that kind of flow. And those guidelines are specifically British. And I think there's a lot of work that has gone into them. And they fit into also the OSPAR context as well, which of course is the Northeast Atlantic Regional Seas Convention.
Are MPA guidelines primarily built around biodiversity conservation? Or do they account for socioeconomics, like fishing?
No, primarily about biodiversity conservation. Absolutely, because we go back to the original definition I said to you, it's about conservation objectives. You could have the added conservation value of or biodiversity value of what we then become other effective conservation measures, and we call those OECMs, and that's where fisheries measures such as the MEs or other closures can be brought into that 30 by 30 within the global biodiversity framework. But MPAs are specific to conservation objectives, yes.
Who's driving the standards?
Depends where and how you're thinking, if you're thinking globally, regionally, or nationally. Certainly in the UK, my understanding is it's JNCC working closely with DEFRA, and then also with Marine Scotland, etc., or Nature Scotland. So that's my understanding of how they're developed in the UK context, yes.
How do fisheries spatial management tools like fishing restricted areas, FRAs, and vulnerable marine ecosystems, VMEs, closure differ in intent and design?
Well, here we go. The UK doesn't have fishing restricted areas, but the Mediterranean does. But what the UK has is inputs into the VMEs, the vulnerable marine ecosystems. And it's a very interesting thing. They're not accepted as MPAs because they're not permanent. Okay, so when I said it has to be for a conservation objective, that's an MPA, plus the next second layer rule is they have to be permanent. And many of the things you just mentioned, like the vulnerable marine ecosystems, like the fisheries restricted areas, like the trawling ban in the Northeast Atlantic. Did you know that 97% of the Northeast Atlantic in international waters cannot be trawled due to the fisheries restricted area in the NAF region? All of those are not permanent. Therefore, they cannot count as MPAs. Plus, they're brought about for fisheries measures, not biodiversity conservation areas. But having said that, those measures are regularly reviewed, regularly assessed, and they are incredibly well policed and enforced. So we have a situation where we have an MPA with some degree of objectives which aren't that well assessed or sometimes enforced, compared to the not permanent things like the vulnerable marine ecosystems, which are very well enforced and carefully monitored. So, and my understanding is things like that Mexican refuges are something quite similar as well. So, because they're not permanent, because they're not conservation objectives, they aren't like MPAs, but they probably have more measures than some of the MPAs.
Are they more adaptable or enforceable than MPAs?
They're certainly more adaptable because they're regularly reviewed. I'm thinking here specifically about the NAF ones, and of course the brand new EU ones, which have caused a lot of problems with various stakeholders. It's a very interesting setup that with an MPA it has to be permanent, but with a VME it isn't permanent, but it is more regularly assessed, and you can add and take away based on the information. But having said that, they rarely are. They tend to be as permanent as MPAs.
Are MPAs been pushed because they are more visible and media friendly?
Could be. It's very interesting. I said to someone recently, we were discussing the calls for trawling bans in MPAs, and he said, well, why don't you just call them something else? And I said, well, because they're called MPAs. And they fulfill the guidelines for MPAs. They have conservation objectives. And we had quite a heated debate as to what is an MPA, why an area-based management tool is called an MPA. And yeah, it does. It has a resonance, doesn't it? It a marine protected area. And then when you get to describe to the general public that you have marine protected areas, and then you have highly protected areas, and then of course you have no take zones, and in the UK system, I'm because I've just arrived back in the UK from ICES, I'm still trying to get up to speed with all the definitions that you have here, because there's about 3 or 4 different acronyms for all the different MPA type of things across England and Scotland, etc. But it is quite a suite of different types of MPA out there.
Okay. Which of these tools show the strongest results in protecting biodiversity and rebuilding fish stocks? MPAs, FRAs, or VMEs?
Well, in theory, a VME takes a long time to recover because it's usually about deep sea organisms. But having said that, a VME is the most dramatic because a VME requires no impact whatsoever. So that's really clear. A VME is basically the same as a highly protected area, marine protected area. So a VME, once you have a closure, it's closed. Nothing can go there. I think overall, the most successful of those are the ones which are developed with stakeholders, with the stewards of the system. I wouldn't because I've already said there's such a suite of different types of MPA. I think it's very difficult to look at MPAs compared to VMEs in that kind of way. The guidelines on VMEs are really quite clear. But as I said to you, the IUCN guidance on MPAs categorizes at least 6 types of MPA. So it is quite tricky to say which and how and whatever. But I would take a step back and say the most effective MPA is the one where all of the people support it and give it credence.
I've been in touch with a guy called me from in the Blackpool area. I can't really find just exactly what but he was maintaining that. Now, I don't know if it's an MPA or fisheries restrictions or whatever, but he says that the Irish parts of the Irish Sea, they're closed, and they have been for about 25 years. And he says there's fish have never returned.
Oh, I can't speak on specific examples on that because, as I said, I'm trying to get close to the ground again. I've been a bit highfalutin, so I can't really answer that one, Jim.
Okay, no, that's...
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. Funny thing about being fast? You end up waiting a lot. First to show up, first in line, then just waiting. Me, I rev up Chumba Casino. With over 200 social casino games, no slow lanes here. Why sit around when you can spin? I'm already racing. Your turn. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Is there any sign MPA guidelines are catching up with the more dynamic data-driven approaches used in fisheries closures?
Ooh. There's a lot of work going on looking at the MPA guidelines, and I'm sure that JNCC at a national level and IUCN internationally and CBD globally are developing tools. And of course, I'm part of the IUCN Fisheries Expert Group, and we've just published a huge document on area-based management tools and how it works with fisheries. And the Fisheries Expert Group have developed and shown the value of area-based management tools. So that includes MPAs, OECMs, vulnerable marine ecosystems, etc., restricted fisheries, restricted areas, etc., etc. And all of that thought is still ongoing. And yes, I mean, the guidelines keep changing, keep developing. I have a feeling that there will be some guidance published at some point which will start talking about gears in MPAs as well, because as I said to you before, the IUCN guidance before talks about industrial fishing, but isn't gear specific. We'll see what that does and how that consultation goes forward.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. How do you feel How do you see the tension between the managing 100% of human impacts on the ocean versus the current focus on protecting 30% of its surface area?
But Jim, you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you? I mean, it takes more resources. It's harder work to manage 100% compared to protect 30. But having said that, the sad thing is that the 30% approach is a very low ambition. Very, very low ambition. The high ambition people should be aiming for 100% management of human activities in our seas and oceans. We try to do it on land. We do it quite successfully, I think, in some areas and some industries. But why we don't manage to do it in the seas and oceans, I don't know. So it takes more resources. It's harder. It's key to a lot of what I've spent my time working on, ecosystem-based management. But I think that's the challenge. That's where our ambition should lie. And protecting areas and protecting species and conserving them is one of the many tools in our toolbox towards that final aim.
Oh, very interesting. Do you feel, coming back from the UNOC, the conference, inspired?
Inspired. I'm not sure it's inspired me. I said already with good progress made, but it was also frustrating. There was a lot of running round. There was a lot of look at me, I'm here, I can contribute. People can accuse me of being guilty of that myself. I think having the focus on the ocean is very, very good. And for all of us that work and are impacted and use the ocean every day, which is a bit cheeky, me saying that now that I'm based in London, having the high profile everywhere can only be to our benefit, I would hope. But it's still a frustration that we are all so polarized. And I think we need to build bridges and have closer conversations, because there was some degree of polarization at the conference.
I asked AI to pick a question for the series, and the response was a challenge to Attenborough. If you had 5 minutes with Sir David, what would you say?
Well, as I said, in my sort of, as I go through this, I think I would ask David Attenborough to spend time with some communities that were demonized in the film, to sit there and look at the people on the bridges of the ships that he was portraying as these alien monsters. I would ask him also to think about just what I said, the high ambition of managing all human pressures in our seas and oceans. Not just taking one tool and saying that is the solution, the panacea, the silver bullet. It's not. It's one of many tools, and it needs to be used with the people, the communities that are impacted. So I'd say to him, talk to the people that you didn't talk to in your film.
Good answer. Which book or article do you think everyone in fisheries should read?
Well, here I'm going to show my Philistine tendencies, I'm afraid. I'm not the world's greatest novel reader. What I would say, and let me think. Now, this is a really geeky answer. I would say go and read 2 things. Now I'm going to say 3 things. And they're all geeky documents. First is the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which is a remarkable piece of work. and actually addresses a lot of the issues and challenges that we're dealing with now. And if it was implemented properly, it would be great. It is a legal text, which is a real problem. The second one is go and read the FAO guidelines for sustainable fisheries. And for ecosystem approach, not sustainable fisheries. The FAO guideline for ecosystem approach or ecosystem approach to fisheries. And that I think you'll find. There are other really geeky ones like the IPES reports on transforming the systems and sustaining wild populations. Exploiting wild populations, etc. So there's lots of geeky stuff to read. But the other one I would suggest, as my third one, is look at the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, the CBD Convention on Biological Diversity website has a very easy site with all 23 targets, and you will be surprised to see that 30 by 30 target 3 is one of 23, and the others are really quite powerful in terms of requiring stakeholder engagement, in terms of managing biodiversity to the benefit of people, in terms of managing biodiversity areas to the benefit of people, and all of those kind of issues. So highlighting 30 by 30, which is a very powerful tool, a very powerful message, is one of 23 targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Too many targets, 23, but still worth a quick scan, I would say. So I didn't answer your question with the novel. I said 3 documents. The UN Fish Stocks Agreements, the FAO Guidelines on Ecosystem Approach to Fisheries, and the Global Biodiversity Framework.
No, you're okay there, because the question is which book or article.
Okay, there we are. Good.
So you've ticked the box. One word to describe the future of British fisheries.
Oh. I would like to give you an optimistic word, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say challenged. Incredibly challenged. And that's for a range of reasons. And we haven't even touched on the whole issue of the competition for space, the pushing out of fisheries for renewable energy. We haven't touched on any of those issues during this podcast, but I think British fishing is incredibly challenged.
Unfortunately, that's been quite a common response I've got from a number of guests.
I think it's made tough. I think it's made tougher by the fact that a lot of the voices on fishing come from urban centres. So, for instance, those crying for action in response to the ocean film tend to be particularly MPs from cities. They have very limited, a very small or limited relationship with people from the coast.
That's so true. And there's 2 MPs, Westminster MPs, have contacted to see could we get them to come on, because they've come out in favour of, they voted in favour of the bans on trawling. Now, her constituency is in Leeds, and the other constituency is in Rotherham, nowhere near coastal constituencies. And I've invited them to come on, seeing they have an opinion on it, and neither of the 2 of them have responded.
Regrettably, or not regrettably, but I'm not surprised, I'm afraid. So.
Yeah. No, I can't say I'm stunned either. Mark, where can our listeners follow you online?
I've stopped being on Twitter, which is a bit annoying because I was very active there. I moved over to Blue Sky, but I found that Blue Sky is not delivering the impact, and people aren't looking at it the way they were looking at Twitter. So I basically operate through LinkedIn. And I used to control who I was linked to quite a lot, but now I'm letting all and sundry. So if people are interested, follow me on LinkedIn.
Good, thank you. Well, I think that folds us up. So I would just like to thank you very much for this today, and I find it really interesting, your views on experiences in the eunuch and your views on going on about the MPAs and things. So thanks very much, Mark. It was really a pleasure.
Jim, it was a great pleasure. I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Consistently throughout UNOC, from the fisheries sector, the people who spoke with passion and had the biggest impact were women. So whether it be in the big governmental panels or the smaller side events, it was the women that got the applause, that managed to get people to pay attention. So that was quite a dramatic impression I have from UNOC. But crucially, Jim, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity again to speak on seafood matters.
Thank you. Thank you.
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.